Welcome to the Be More Objectivistic podcast, The Antidote to Collectivism. Our podcast was created for the curious listener who has heard the word objectivism but is unsure what it means, where it comes from, or why it matters. You do not need a background in philosophy to listen to our podcast episodes. Every concept is explained in plain language, with practical examples drawn from history and the present day. Objectivism is, at its core, a philosophy of life. It asks, what is real? How do we know it? What is the good life? How should people live together? These questions are not dusty academic abstractions. They are the very questions that drive political movements, shape economies, and determine whether civilizations flourish or collapse. Are you ready to begin? Okay, let's go. Objectivism versus collectivism, socialism, progressivism, and the left. 6.1 The philosophical roots of collectivism. Collectivism is the doctrine that the group, the collective, the class, the nation, the race, the community, is the primary unit of moral concern, and that the individual exists to serve it. It has taken many forms in history: fascism, communism, socialism, nationalism, and modern progressivism are all variations on the same fundamental theme. Collectivism's philosophical roots run deep. Plato's Republic, which Objectivism regards as one of the most dangerous books ever written, argued for a society ruled by philosopher kings who would direct others' lives for the common good. Rousseau's General Will posited a collective consciousness superior to any individual's judgment. Hegel's notion of the state as the march of the world spirit through history provided the intellectual scaffolding for both fascism and Marxism. Karl Marx synthesized these elements into a comprehensive theory of history as class struggle, predicting the inevitable triumph of the proletariat and the withering away of the state into a communist utopia. The 20th century tested this theory repeatedly. The results were catastrophic. 6.2 The failure of socialism. Socialism, in its pure form, state ownership and central planning of the means of production, has been tried in more than a dozen countries. Without exception, it has produced poverty, shortages, tyranny, and mass death. The Soviet Union, Mao's China, Cuba, North Korea, Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, Venezuela under Chavez and Maduro, the pattern is consistent and undeniable. The explanation is not merely that these regimes were led by bad people, though many were. It is structural. As Mises demonstrated, without private ownership of the means of production, there are no genuine prices. Without prices, there is no mechanism for allocating resources rationally. Without rational allocation, production becomes chaotic, shortages proliferate, and the central planners must resort to force to maintain control. This is not an ideological argument, it is an economic law, as certain as the laws of thermodynamics. The Soviet Union had to import wheat from capitalist nations. Venezuela, the country with the world's largest proven oil reserves, ran out of basic food staples and medicine. This is not bad luck, it is the inevitable result of destroying the price system. 6.3 Modern Progressivism, Collectivism in Democratic Dress. Modern progressivism, the dominant ideology of the Western academic, media, and bureaucratic establishment, is not Stalinist communism. It does not, usually, advocate overtly for violent revolution or total state ownership. But it shares collectivism's foundational premises. The group, defined by race, gender, class, or identity, is the primary unit of moral concern. Individual achievement is suspect. It is attributed to privilege, systemic advantage, or exploitation. Equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity, is the goal of social policy. Government intervention in the economy, culture, and speech is not only permitted but required to achieve social justice. The state is the proper vehicle for redistributing resources, policing acceptable speech, and ensuring equity. From an objectivist perspective, these premises are philosophically disastrous. They deny the efficacy of the individual mind, undermine personal responsibility, and require the coercive machinery of the state to enforce their vision, creating precisely the conditions that have led, historically, to tyranny. 6.4 The welfare state and the destruction of incentives. The modern welfare state, even in its democratic, non-communist form, is, in objectivist terms, a philosophical and practical failure in the making. By taxing producers to support non-producers, it punishes the virtues of work, saving, and investment while subsidizing dependence. Over time, this erodes both economic productivity and cultural character. This is not callousness toward the poor. It is the observation that the most effective engine of poverty reduction in history has not been wealth redistribution but economic growth driven by free markets and individual initiative. The question is not whether we want people to be better off, everyone does, but what actually works. History answers, freedom works, coercion does not. 6.5 Critical theory, social justice, and the attack on reason. Among the most philosophically significant developments of the late 20th and early 21st centuries is the rise of critical theory, postmodernism, and their academic offspring, critical race theory, gender studies, queer theory, and the broader identity politics of the contemporary left. These intellectual movements share a fundamental philosophical commitment that places them in direct, irreconcilable opposition to objectivism. They reject the Enlightenment idea that there is an objective reality accessible to rational inquiry. Instead, they hold that knowledge is a social construct, that reason is merely a tool of power, and that truth claims are expressions of privilege rather than correspondence to facts. This is, from an objectivist perspective, not merely wrong but nihilistic. It destroys the very tools needed to evaluate ideas, reform institutions, or pursue justice. If reason is merely ideology and truth is power, then no argument can be won or lost, only power matters. This leads, inevitably, to the substitution of force for persuasion in political life. There are two sides to every issue. One side is right and the other is wrong, but the middle is always evil. Ayn Rand. 6.6 Environmentalism, Conservation versus Coercion. Objectivism is not indifferent to the natural environment. Human beings depend on the world they live in, and rational long-term self-interest includes not fouling one's own nest. But it distinguishes sharply between legitimate environmental science and the political environmentalist movement that has increasingly used environmental concerns as a justification for massive expansions of government power. The modern green agenda, in its most radical forms, explicitly attacks industrial civilization, economic growth, and human flourishing as evils to be restrained. This is not environmentalism, it is anti-human collectivism dressed in ecological language. The proper solution to genuine environmental harms is property rights, the rule of law, and liability for polluters, not sweeping government control of energy, transportation, and manufacturing. 6.7 A comparison of core values. The following table summarizes the fundamental opposition between objectivism and collectivist progressive ideology. Domain, fundamental unit. Objectivism, the individual. Collectivist/progressive, the group/collective. Domain, source of rights. Objectivism, human nature/reason. Collectivist/progressive, government/social consensus. Domain, basis of morality. Objectivism, rational self-interest. Collectivist/progressive, self-sacrifice/duty to the collective. Domain, economic system. Objectivism, laissez-faire capitalism. Collectivist/progressive, state-managed/socialist economy. Domain, role of government. Objectivism, protect individual rights. Collectivist/progressive, redistribute wealth, manage society. Domain, view of achievement. Objectivism, earned through individual merit. Collectivist/progressive, product of privilege/systemic forces. Domain, view of equality. Objectivism, equality before the law. Collectivist/progressive, equality of outcome. Domain, epistemology. Objectivism, objective reason and logic. Collectivist/progressive, social construction of knowledge. Domain, view of freedom. Objectivism, absence of coercion. Collectivist/progressive, positive power to fulfill needs. Domain, primary virtue. Objectivism, rationality/productivity. Collectivist/progressive, solidarity/compliance/sacrifice. Thank you for listening to our Be More Objectivistic podcast episode. In an era of surging collectivism, government expansion, and ideological conformity, understanding objectivism has never been more urgent. Whether you are a student, a professional, an entrepreneur, or simply a citizen trying to make sense of the world, Our podcast episodes give you a foundation, clear, logical, and grounded in reality, for thinking about freedom, morality, and the future of human civilization.